Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the little delay there until we got to the magic number of 7. So thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jonathan.
Hi, Dave. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm good. I'm about to, Josh asked me to cover a board meeting for Dana because Chandler's gone, which is about to start in a couple minutes. It's the North Carolina IT strategy board meeting.
Hey, Amy,
And it's supposed to, I don't know how it's scheduled from 9 to.
There she goes. Okay, there we go. Sorry, Amy, we put you on mute. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to September's Technology IT Strategy Board meeting. It's been since June since we met. A lot has happened in that time frame, believe it or not. And so unfortunately, I got to kill for some time here until some of our presenters can come. So Tracy, you may be earlier in the batting lineup than you expected because you're the punctual one. Let me start off with some good.
I guess, Jim, that'll teach me to be on time, and I will recall this I will cite this at the future meeting when I'm crazy late.
Yeah, so you can give Jeff a hard time. You can give Nate a hard time later as well. So since the last time we met, a lot of positive things developing here across the IT community. So first and foremost, as we look at the short session, we basically, the funding request that we submitted forward for consideration through the governor's budget request over to the legislature. The legislature did go ahead and approve the funding for us. And what that is enabling us to do now is, the first domino of as we start looking at this paradigm shift from having employees tied to a book of business on operational things. What we've been able to do now is pull our employees out of the cost recovery structure. And now we do not have employees tied to a book of business from a financial aspect. This now allows us to start doing the retraining, retooling, re-equipping as we start looking at the opportunities to shift into governance and enterprise architecture, program management, portfolio management, those areas that we really need to hone in on as DIT and a lot of the initiatives that we're talking about here later today. So that was phenomenal. That work is underway right now to make that happen. And then likewise, what that has done then is, as you can imagine, a significant price drop on service rates. Now, I will tell you, there's probably somewhat of a fear that the price is going to be so attractive, everybody's going to want to jump on it. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for right now, we will just continue focused on we're getting our employees and making them more versatile, more agile to respond to the needs of the IT community as opposed to being tied to a book of business based upon an IT technology. So that was a fantastic update for us. Last Thursday, had the opportunity to go to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. So the first one I've been to in a year and a half. And we had talked a lot about DIT. We talked about broadband, cyber, privacy, cloud, digital transformation. It was well received by the legislative members there. Nate did talk extensively about broadband. He'll talk about that a little bit later here. So the committee is up to date on the latest and greatest developments that were there making happen in the broadband world. But again, good, solid conversation, and legislative members were very pleased overall with the direction that DIT is going in and continues to encourage us to pursue these matters forward. So it kind of, Tracy, like some of the things we talked about for digital transformation, trying to set those stages now. So when we go into a long session, there's a better understanding fundamentally what it is we're trying to accomplish and why it's important. Other good news is our state organization, the National Association of State CIOs, has its annual awards process. What makes NASCIO unique is those awards are reviewed by peers. It's not by outside groups or other entities. And we submitted 9 projects, and 7 of them are named as finalists. And so, Caitlin, if you're still on, Caitlin and Sarah Porper were 2 of the instrumental parties behind the scenes to get these things in the needed order. So, Caitlin, if you want to just talk a little bit about it or just show the projects that were submitted, and then the ones that got finished as a finalist. I will tell you, State Scoop referred to North Carolina as the Ben-Hur of IT awards. Now I forgot all about the Academy Awards thing that Ben-Hur cleaned up on in that area. I was out there trying to figure out, did Ben-Hur die? What happened? What's the reference here? I wasn't quite sure on that, but I was assured that it was that Ben-Hur had all the nominations and cleaned house. Now, I will tell you, unfortunately, there's participation trophy rules in NASCIO, so a state can only go home with 2. So I know who won. I know who the 2 are. We won't put that out there today. We won't get ahead of ourselves. But Caitlin, if you could just quickly go over the nominations and who our finalists are.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Yes, that was a very entertaining article. Thank you for sharing that. So as Jim mentioned, I'm going to put you guys down the bottom of my screen so that I can read you our nominees. We had, my count, I think we had 8 that actually ended up being finalists out of 9 total submissions, which was very exciting. So the categories that I'm just going to go through each one in the category. So business process innovations, DHHS was a finalist for their automated COVID-19 reporting system, which is an open beds situation. For cross-boundary collaboration and partnership, we had the Pandemic Electronic Benefit Transfer Program, which was additional food assistance benefits. And that was between DHHS and DPI. And for cybersecurity, we have our very own Rob Main, Collective Defense and Support, a whole of state approach to cybersecurity. You guys are mentioned in there. Data management, analytics, and visualization. Our Division of Employment Security was a finalist for their unemployment insurance fraud detection and prevention program using data analytics. That is also a partnership with GDAC. And then we have digital service, government to business. Secretary of State's office is our finalist for that, with an online document filing wizard for business creation. For emerging and innovative technologies, we have our FirstNet team with their ATSC 3.0 and public safety communications project. And for enterprise IT management initiatives, we have our DOA's move to cloud procurement. And then our last finalist was for information communication technology innovations. That one is a mouthful. And that is DPS with their prison telehealth program for virtual visits that was actually begun prior to the pandemic, but massively ramped up as a result of the pandemic. So those are all of our folks with major recognition. And we're super excited to see, well, when we get to actually announce who our 2 big winners are.
And so the official announcement of those winners will be on the Tuesday of NASCIO, which I think is October 11th. It's the day after Columbus Day at the annual conference. Now, I'm fortunate enough to be co-chair of the awards committee. I had no influence on these things whatsoever. Again, I go back to its peer review, but it would be nice to be up on stage and be able to award our North Carolinian members here for the great work that's been going on. Continuing on the good news front, as Caitlin and Sarah were focused on NASCIO awards, before that they were focused on our digital government survey submission that every state completes on a biennial basis. And so they basically had no late winter. I think they forgot about Easter and maybe made it to Mother's Day when they came back out of the writing cramp mode. But we did get word from eRepublic, Digital Government, Terry Takai in particular, if anybody knows Terry Takai. And for the first time ever, North Carolina is receiving its highest grade ever in the state. So that hopefully we can talk a lot more publicly about that within the next week, if not this week yet. We're waiting for them to release their press release. But North Carolina is being duly recognized for a lot of progress, and especially in the area of resiliency as well. So just more great news there. We'll be officially recognized for that great work on the Sunday evening of the NASCIO conference. So that would be October 9th. eRepublic, Digital Government's having their ceremony, and we'll have the opportunity for the states to be recognized in that area. So again, our agencies, and in particular, Sarah and Caitlin, did a phenomenal job of getting the state postured. the bar is set high, which means I don't know where we go next, but we're going to try to figure out where we raise the bar to next to continue to move forward. But we're very much, everyone's watching us, everyone's looking up to us and seeing what we're doing here in North Carolina. With that said, though, as we all know, we still got a tremendous amount of work to do. And while we can celebrate in our successes here, and we need to, we got to get back to the grindstone and get some things done as well. Just for everyone's awareness, and I know it's not going to be part of the cybersecurity update here later today of the work group, but DHS CISA today dropped the notice of funding opportunity for the IIJA cybersecurity grant money for state, local, tribal. We are going through and digesting it. There's areas of great disappointment in what was released. There's areas of confusion. And so our national organization does have a call Tuesday afternoon with CISA. So across the state CIO, state CISO community, clarification can be sought from CISA on some of these areas. So we're going to continue to digest that NOFO, come up with our questions and concerns as it relates to that, and then we'll move forward. But at least the NOFO is finally dropped. So we'll give the federal government credit for moving forward with getting, at least making the money tree available. Basically, what states have is 60 days to submit their cyber planning grant to CISA, and that would then start the flow of federal dollars into it, and then the corresponding cost matches and all those kind of things. New in the community, by the way, I don't know if everyone's been following this or not, but as you know, Sindhu left the city of Raleigh earlier this year to go back to Houston, or to the county, that Harris County, I think is where Houston's in. Her previous job for some family matters. So we're sorry to see her have gone. But we just learned about a week and a half ago that Mark Wittenberg, who was the CIO for the city of Tempe, Arizona, is now in Raleigh and is here now filling her big shoes. I have had the pleasure of meeting Mark before and some work that we had been exposed to in Arizona. So looking forward to reconnecting to Mark and getting reintegrated with what's going on at the city level. And then this week, Ashley Jacobs, who used to be the CIO for Wake County, got promoted to deputy manager. She now announced Jonathan Feldman, who was the CIO for the city of Asheville, will now be the Wake County CIO. So hopefully now, with Mark and Jonathan coming on board, we can get back to, you know, what can we do from a state, county, local government perspective here in our own backyard. And as we talk about some of these things across digital transformation, interaction of state, local government, it'll be an awesome opportunity to get reconnected and move forward there. So I think that's all the updates I have at the moment. And with that in mind, and I know we're not at 9:30 yet, so we have to change the batting order a little bit. So what we wanted to do is provide the committee the updates from our three subcommittees. And so Tracy, for being on time, she gets penalized by going first. So Tracy, if you would please tell us what's new in the digital transformation area.
Sure, happy to. And thanks to Julie and team for not only driving through the one slide update, but also helping us to produce it. As has been our tradition since the last meeting, I guess the second time we can call it a tradition, we're sort of trying to describe or convey our projects through the three areas. First, tracking the projects on things. We've been doing 90-day updates, sort of, you know, traffic light updates on the status of these. And probably at the next meeting or the one after, we'll share that with this group. But again, toward the process of tracking progress against the roadmap elements that we defined more than a year ago. You may recall on the last one, we had a decent number of yellow lights, maybe a red light or two, a green light or so. I would say that the limiting factor, as probably won't surprise folks, continues to be staffing within, right? Within DIT, specifically aimed at helping to shepherd and move along and track particular digital transformation projects. We're happy to have seen in this last quarter one of our own from the Digital Transformation Committee, Keith Briggs, go over to join DIT to help reinforce and bolster those services internally. Particularly in the tracking progress on roadmap elements, There were two notable things in the last quarter that we spent a decent amount of time with. One was a review of an update from the team on the chatbot evaluation that's underway. And notable for this group would be that according to the timeline as it's set now, and of course we know these things can always change, we're looking toward selection of one of those tools, one of those chatbots. And if I recall correctly, there are 4 that have been in consideration, but we're looking towards selection of one of those chatbots in the final quarter of this year, and probably a demo as well for the ITSB. Also noteworthy in the past quarter has been about the chatbot in particular, and because we've now included the Secretary of State representation on the call, or perhaps because we now know that there was perhaps a parallel effort going on within the Secretary of State's office, and so getting those things merged together felt to me like a good and noteworthy thing to talk about regarding what the impact and effectiveness of the Digital Transformation Committee has been. The other thing I would note about the tracking roadmap elements is that we had a review of the constituent portal effort and talked a fair amount about the status, communication, and governance on that. So we've used our meetings, again, to do somewhat deeper dives as well as those high-level tracking of progress. The next up pieces that we see are around integrating the constituent portal engagement platform with the new North Carolina ID, and also in process thinking about and reviewing the activity to form a digital identity working group. So those all feel like good, strong improvements and progress over the last quarter. Wanted to note those. The second area that we've been talking about since the last meeting, again, at a high level reporting level, is how do we use the Digital Transformation Committee to help make the case for digital transformation broadly. You may recall my last report in the prior quarter, we talked about both participation at a couple of meetings by the Secretary of State and State's office, and likewise by DIT and DMV regarding the joint or similar projects that are of interest and conveying digital transformation within their domains. So on that one, and sort of underlined here, I have maybe an area of focus in the next quarter, or hope toward focus, is really the importance of digital transformation and roadmap elements and the technical and functional partnerships. We spent a fair amount of time on this on the last call and shared sort of the benchmarking approaches that we, the members who are not affiliated with the state, have taken for governing our projects in the private sector or otherwise. And really one of the key things, a couple of the key things that came out from our group included the importance of those technical and functional partnerships, and the idea of frequent short meetings as a way to make sure technology and the business side are well aligned. Because as we've all probably experienced in the past, it's not uncommon for technology to do its thing and then business to not even realize what its thing was or how they might have provided input. I'm not suggesting that tends to be the case with the state. I'm suggesting in my world that is sometimes the case. And so the importance of these committees was stressed, and as an element of that, and the need for something and a governance side around digital transformation that has not only those of us who have been on the calls around technology, but counterparts, right, throughout DIT and the state agencies and municipalities. The second big area of work over the last quarter was continuing to benchmark from the private sector. And I thank my colleagues here, Tina and Ann, who are both on the call, Tina Piccioni and Ann Hungate. And they have really helped to lead the effort of benchmarking within the private sector. We would call that progressing, but there's one piece that's still in process. We haven't quite gotten to the point. We've done great benchmarks. The royal we, they have done great benchmarks that have given us really helpful information that frame the overall process. Where we aren't yet, Jim, and we'll see if we can get there, is kind of comparative data on costs, on staffing, on the other components that might be helpful to you as you go into that long session and think about what what your requests are, and hopefully we can get to a point of having something to help make the case that what you're asking for is not too far out of line. So moving on to the third piece of what we've presumed our digital transformation committee guidance is. And I also, as I come to this third piece, note that both Nate and Jeff have joined, so I can now go a little faster rather than feeling like I was getting this signal from the audience or from the director. Ensuring the roadmap really extends statewide is the third really primary activity that we've been focused on. And the efforts there are continuing to expand the engagement with the agencies and local governments. I mentioned earlier, Secretary of State's office and DMV/DOT were our sort of successes 3 months ago. And so now we're continuing to think about what would be the next one we would bring in, and continuing to include both those agencies in the digital transformation meetings. Again, growing the team right through agency engagement there, at least on the IT side, sometimes also on the business side. And then the second significant activity over the last quarter has been continuing to track and support the DIT and DMV partnership that's already being pursued as a priority with Governor Cooper's administration. Next up for that group will be opportunities beyond Pay It. You may recall that Pay It has been a really good and promising activity coming out largely out of DMV and DOT, but embraced by DIT and hopefully brought to others, so that we can think about how North Carolina not only has a common approach to payment and a secure approach to payment for all of the agencies, but also how a collection of people using the same system can drive some economies of scale. And then in process, we had this in process last time. It remains in process this time. Our next aim is to take what we heard from the DMV DOT efforts and the Secretary of State efforts in terms of some of their priorities, and to get those integrated in and reflected on our own digital transformation roadmap, so that it becomes one step broader than DIT's digital transformation roadmap. And by doing that successively over time, we hope that it can become a living document and grow into a roadmap truly for the whole of the state, rather than for DIT primarily. And that would at some point include municipalities, where you're going to figure out, and talked with Jim a fair amount at the last meeting, some of the municipalities that might become the great candidates. And it was welcome news to hear about what's going on in Raleigh in terms of new leadership. So I'll stop there, having done the filibuster, as I think it was Jim who noted in the chat, and invite other members of the committee, if anyone wants to weigh in with further color commentary on what I described there as our work over the last quarter, and those things that are upcoming over the next.
Well, first off, Tracy, I'll say your skills would make you proud if you were in DC. So thank you. I'll add a couple of things. So I probably we earlier this week celebrated the completion of the Drupal platform upgrade from 7 to 9 with the small but mighty team. Also on Tuesday, a new customer came on board the Drupal platform, North Carolina's National Guard. So the public-facing part of North Carolina's National Guard is now being hosted here in DIT on the Drupal platform as well. So that was great. When I of course, you all know I drill with them as well. When talking with the knowledge manager for the National Guard, he had nothing but positive accolades to say. The negative he casted our way, and I term it as a negative, you need more of them. So we are definitely going to be looking at trying to figure out how we can augment and expand that team, because they're doing great work. I also believe there's some work done and some initial phasing for Secretary of State. So Glenn P. G-Pop, if you're out there, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we are going to be engaging with Secretary of State probably later this calendar year. They're working on their back office modernization effort, and the intent is to obviously look at the different registrations, licenses, and processes that they have with the business community, and look at which ones we can take to transform and utilize on our effort with the constituent engagement platform, whatever we decide that to be. We're going to be looking at the processes that underlie delivery of those services and look at where we can improve those, take out the waste, because that's one thing we always want to stress is first look at the processes to deliver the services, optimize those before you automate them. So we'll be re-engaging with Bill Toole and his team very soon.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. And then just lastly here, Tracy mentioned the efforts with DOT/DMV. So there is a cross-agency functional group being assembled that DMV/DOT and DIT will be part, obviously spearheading, but working through the governor's office. And really what we're trying to look at is how do we get the state of North Carolina to a mobile driver's license and a mobile identification card. That is something that the administration is very much would like to see happen. I don't know if we can get it done before the governor's end of his second term, but we're definitely going to be well underway. And then this brings in, I mean, this is the whole digital transformation. How does identity play into this? There's a whole bunch of other caveats that come into play. So it's a big effort. And then if you just think about 100 counties, sheriffs, all those other law enforcement communities and how they would engage in a mobile driver's license. So this is not something insignificant. This is going to be a huge lift, huge effort. But our digital transformation team is rocking it, and just want to say thank you publicly as we did earlier this week. Are there any questions or other things related to this group's update?
Great.
Okay.
As we finish, I'll just shout out again to Tina and Ann, the great help that they've been doing as a sort of voluntary subgroup within our group, looking at the benchmarking more generally for DT.
Yeah, and I will say that as a subcommittee, we've agreed to probably reduce the frequency of meetings a little bit because we're going to kind of be in a holding pattern until we can get into the long session, our budget development, and what our ask is. So I don't think we're going to be meeting every month like has happened in the past, but we're going to reduce that frequency. And so, but that does not mean we're losing momentum. Don't want that to be seen at all here. We're going to continue to move forward. We just don't need to bring everybody together as frequently. So thank you, team, for all your great work and appreciate it dramatically. Yeah.
Just
so
let folks know, we'll meet on the off months when this committee doesn't meet. So we will continue to meet monthly. 2 of those will be focused down in on digital transformation, and then the third of every month is jointly with this group to give a report and hear the broader issues that are arising. So we think that'll be the right cadence. It will also give DIT kind of a bit of space between some of the meetings to actually make progress rather than moving from meeting to meeting and thinking about, you know, what can you report? What'd you do for me in the last 30 days?
Yeah, or how you can digitally transform my calendar, Tracy.
There you go.
Okay, well, thank you all again. And on that note, then we're going to go ahead because I know Nate has a prescribed window of availability here. A lot going on in broadband. We talked at length about the broadband update at the joint JLOC meeting last week. So let me turn it over to Nate and talk about all the fantastic stuff going in from a broadband aspect. So Nate, take it away, sir.
Thank you, Secretary Weaver. Can everybody hear me all right? Excellent. Good morning, members of the board. I appreciate your time and I'm really excited to give you the update we've got today. You know, just as a starting point, I'll remind members of the board that Session Law 2021-180, which was the long session budget passed last year, was signed into law in November and appropriated $1.036 billion to the broadband mission, largely addressing broadband infrastructure deployment incentives, with a little bit of money for administering the program and a little bit of money for digital equity and literacy offerings and raising awareness of affordability programming. I'm pleased to report today that we have, as of the very end of last month, now awarded 25.7% of those funds already. So we, as of the 31st, have awarded $267 million through the Great Grant Program over 3 rounds. And I love this map because it's almost done. But we've now awarded grants in 92 counties. We started in July. We received, and I think I've told the board this previously, we received 305 total applications. Can you go back to the, well, we've got the map there, that's fine. We've received 305 total applications proposing to serve about 480,000 locations statewide, so households and businesses. The majority of counties were eligible to participate in the program. Of course, the grantees in the Great Grant Program are internet providers, right? So the 8 counties here that are highlighted in white, where there has not been a Great Grant award to this point, for the most part cannot be awarded in this cycle. A couple of these counties didn't have a Great Grant application from an internet provider in the first place. A couple of those because, for example, Brunswick in the southeast, because they've just, and Mecklenburg, because they've got really, really strong, thorough coverage already. Mecklenburg from a variety of providers. I think Brunswick has a really thorough map of coverage from a telephone membership co-op down there that received a fair amount of federal funding previously. We had a number of counties that chose to spend their rescue plan funds on broadband infrastructure outside of our programs, which renders them ineligible to be the site of a Great Grant under state law, or to participate in the Completing Access to Broadband program, which is next. And a couple of counties that have major pending or already complete federal awards that dramatically changed the map for us there, because we can't award state funding where there's already been federal funding for a broadband project. But in mid-July, we were able to award our first batch, and I'll talk a little bit about that more later, but that was about 23 million. We came back with another 30 million in August 1st, and then on the 31st, 206 million in 69 counties statewide. That funding has gone to 15 Great Grant applicants. Julie, if you can go back up one slide, please. Thank you. That are a mix of major publicly traded corporations and smaller providers, including a handful of telephone and electric cooperatives, and some small businesses as well. Our average cost per location has increased as we expected from previous rounds. The total project cost in the 2018-2019 rounds of the Great Grant Program was in the $2,600–2,700 range, and of course that's gone up. We've seen, and I've talked with this board previously about supply chain issues, fiber costs, and timelines increasing there. But now we've awarded to 112,000 total locations. About 25,000 of those are businesses, and the remainder are individual households. The Great Grant Program has also secured nearly $150 million in private sector match commitments. As you'll recall, the Great Grant Program is a cash reimbursement program, and the provider has to chip in, depending on how they score, a range of 15 to 50% of the project costs there. And I'll just mention briefly that the grant awards are pretty evenly divided by region and by economic distress tier released by Department of Commerce. And so we feel really good about the spread of these locations. Can you go to the next slide, Julie? I want to acknowledge the great, no pun intended, team. We have to say no pun intended anytime anyone does a presentation about the Great Grant Program, at least once. But the incredible work that the Broadband Infrastructure Office team did to move these grants as quickly as they did. There we go. Again, budget was signed in mid-November. I think the 18th of November We opened the Great Grant round January 30th. That's when the application portal opened. Our original deadline was April 4th, but we received a fair amount of feedback from both counties and internet providers suggesting that they needed more time to figure out the new partnership rules under statute. I think when we were approaching that April 4th deadline, we had a little over 100 applications that were in process. And of course, by the time we had extended that a month and approached May 4th, like I said, we ended up with 305 applications. We feel really good about that decision. The late May, we began the 20-day statutorily required posting period for all Great Grant applications and the protest process. As you know, statute requires us to make these applications available, and the Great Grant program is targeted at unserved areas. Those are the only areas eligible for funding. And so providers may protest an application if they already serve that a given location in the application with broadband speed internet access. We received 216 protests on our 305 applications for about, let's see, I've lost the total protest location number, but of the 216 protests, we granted 104. We partially granted 31 of them, and we rejected 81. Ultimately, 168,000 locations of the 480,000 originally applied for were the successful site of a protest, at least one protest. We had some overlap as well. Under the protest rules, any protested application may not be awarded until a certain amount of time after we've notified the protester and the applicant. So we couldn't do all of our awards at one time. So again, in mid-July and again at the very beginning of August, we identified counties in which all applications were not protested and all locations had been resolved for federal funding issues and other kind of protected area questions to allow us to start getting money out the door as quickly as possible. But the big batch, that $206 million that we awarded on the 31st of August, those were all awarded in counties in which there was a protest. So we had to wait that extra couple of weeks. But I wanted to put this slide up for everyone to see kind of how we were, I think, being opportunistic about ways to get moving as quickly as possible in every county that we could. Next slide, please. Of course, now that we have awarded these great grants in 92 counties, we're in the process of getting additional information from grantees and working on finalizing grant agreements. Upon the completion of a grant agreement, the internet provider may start work and we can start reimbursing that work. Of course, it's a cash reimbursement program, so they have to show us the receipts before any funds go out of the Great Grant account. And providers have 2 years upon signing that grant agreement to actually complete the project. We're also gearing up for the Completing Access to Broadband program, which is the $400 million county partnership program. We are working on working with the FCC on our mapping to get a better sense of unserved and underserved locations across the state, and have now met with all but I think about 10 counties to start gearing them up for the CAB process. So that's the one by which we will jointly identify unserved and underserved areas and develop a request for proposals. We're actually going to build a convenience contract that will pre-qualify providers that have infrastructure in a given county or are interested in providing infrastructure in a county, and allow the county to develop a streamlined statement of work against that convenience contract. And that program will launch in the coming months. Our first step there will be to go to each county manager where there is an unfunded great grant and say, do you want us to use CAB funds to bless this project and initiate it as quickly as possible? I think there will be a number of counties that developed partnership agreements with a given provider for a great grant application, and that preferred provider did not win the great grant based on the 14 different scoring criteria. And so we'll see a number of counties that are very eager to move down that list and work with additional providers in their county. We will have program guidance out for the new broadband pole replacement program and the stopgap solutions program by the end of this year, planning to launch those programs in Q1 of next calendar year. And then, of course, I've focused a lot on broadband infrastructure, but I'll mention quickly our Office of Digital Equity and Literacy, which has $50 million appropriated to it for the next 4 years to raise awareness of affordability program and build digital literacy tools. They're opening up their first round later this month. It's a $10 million pot that will fund other public programs geared toward digital literacy work. So, for example, state libraries, ag extension offices, and other state entities, community college programs, and so on that have or can build digital navigator programs, affordability programming, digital literacy tools, or kind of community development opportunities, preparing for the additional influx of federal funding we anticipate for North Carolina. Next slide, please. The Affordable Connectivity Program, as you know, is a really important piece of our strategy here because we can run fiber through your front yard, but if you can't afford the service or don't have a device or the skills to use it, you are still getting left behind. So one of our core initiatives is raising awareness of the Affordable Connectivity Program. I would encourage board members to help with your local stakeholders and customers, clients, raising awareness of this program. Folks can go to getinternet.gov to find out about their own eligibility for this program, but it'll give you $30 a month for low-income households toward the cost of internet service. We now have more than 550,000 North Carolinians or North Carolinian households rather enrolled in the program. And you can see here that enrollment is heavily geared toward urban and suburban areas. We've got a lot of work to do across the rest of the state. Annette Taylor and her excellent Office of Digital Equity and Literacy team are building a multi-county pilot now that will help us target outreach with trusted local partners in some more rural counties, and hope to make more of a dent in that statewide really soon. We believe, as I mentioned, there are about 550,000 households enrolled. We think the number of eligible households tracking toward the broadest criterion, which is 200% of poverty level, is closer to 1.4 or 1.5 million. So we have a lot of work to do there. And then last slide, again, I close out every time mentioning, we're focusing our efforts right now on American Rescue Plan funding and state funding, but we also have bipartisan infrastructure law funding coming our way. The BEAD program from the National Telecommunication and Information Administration in DC will give North Carolina a really hefty allocation of resources for last mile funding that will likely go into the Great Grant Program, CAB program, and Stopgap Solutions program. We submitted our application for $5 million in initial planning funds in mid-August and are going back and forth with NTIA on some details around that application. And we submitted our Digital Equity Planning Grant Program application in July, and that should open up about $1.5 million in funding for the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy to build a 5-year digital equity plan so that we're well positioned to, one, draw down additional federal resources, but two, I think most importantly, prepare and facilitate local stakeholders, nonprofits, schools, and other entities across North Carolina to also bring down funding that won't come to state government. So that's a very, very fast overview of our work. I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks very much for your time.
I think Joe has a question.
Yes, thank you. Nate, this was a great update, super interesting. I'm curious on the subsidy or whatever we're calling it, the getinternet.gov. How would like the average citizen who qualifies for this know about this? I mean, you mentioned, help from the Committee on Outreach, but is there a communication strategy to get the word out so we can increase participation in that?
Yeah, our office, it's a great question. Our Office of Digital Equity and Literacy is building that strategy already. We've got a number of partners that we're working with statewide to spread the word. Someone mentioned the Pay It program previously. Pay It users received an email making them aware of that program. Of course, you also have to go offline, right, to try and tell people about internet affordability. And so we've got a lot more to do. We're exploring text options, working with local partners like Digital Charlotte and others. Or I'm sorry, now that they've changed their name, the Center of Digital Equity in Charlotte, that's doing great digital navigator work with Charlotte's 311 service, right? So folks can call in and ask how to get cheaper internet there and be directed through the eligibility test and through sign up. And we're planning to invest in and build up those kinds of programs statewide through some of this funding that I mentioned from the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy to help more people find out about it. So I think more to come there. The FCC has recently announced some outreach funding, grant funding that we can go get as well to help that effort. And of course, our directive here from the Secretary, the Governor, and from the General Assembly has been, go get what we can, right, to bring it home and connect more North Carolinians. So still a lot to do, but I think we've got the right team in place to build and execute that outreach plan, and we'll make sure to keep the board updated as we do.
Yeah, and Joe, just to add to that, last week during JLOC, again, we made the plea to our legislative members. And so our legislative liaison, Monica Fuller, has equipped every legislative office with material regarding the Affordable Connectivity Program. And the plea from us is please push this material out in your legislative districts. Help us get this word spread. Just yesterday, I was down in Terrell delivering school supplies as part of the governor's school drive effort. And we empowered the school district with a large amount of material. They're going to sit there, push that out. In fact, their IT resource officer, I think was her official title. She already had it posted out on social media and everything for the school district. So, and sending flyers home. So we're trying to engage at a multiplicity of levels. So I think the plea here is, in some way, shape, or fashion, we're all leaders in our community, centers of influence. There's not enough of talking about this to get the word out. So we rather have redundancy than no one talking about it.
Right. I particular, you mentioned schools. I think about kids getting left behind, and that's really sad. So I appreciate the update, Nate. One other quick question. I'm just curious, what would be the basis for some of these providers contesting the awards? What are they objecting to specifically?
Specifically in the protest process?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only criterion for which they may protest is that a given application, that 10% of the locations or more in a given application are already served, right? So the again, the Great Grant program is focused on unserved locations. That will evolve with the Completing Access to Broadband program. Will move from not just locations that have 25.3 speeds or slower, but locations that have lower than 100 down and 20 up speeds, and start to address that underserved number. But again, in the great grant process, that protest is only considered if they hit a 10% threshold for locations that they're calling served.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I should note they can also protect an area where there's already federal funding. So, for example, locations that are receiving Rural Digital Opportunity Funds or USDA Reconnect funds or some other federal funding source comes off our map too. And sometimes we learn about sometimes we're aware of those locations already. Sometimes we found out about those locations through the protest process. So that's the other way.
Got it. Great update. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And just in the chat, Monica added that congressional members or congressional delegations getting the information today as well sent to them. So again, we're trying federal, state, local, we're trying every means to get the information out. Tracy, you have your hand up, ma'am?
I do, and I had 4 questions, but now only have 3. Thanks for that, or 2 questions and a comment. Thanks for the clarification about that 10% is that threshold. One of my questions had been about, of the locations served, how do we know, or how do we make sure they were new servings rather than better coverage for the same old. So thanks for that. The comment I had was, I wondered, and you guys have probably already done this or thought of this, the affordable lunch programs and whether that's another mechanism to get the word out to households. My actual questions were about the easy one. I heard you say 92 of the 100 counties, and that Brunswick, for example, wasn't served because it had such good service. Is that the case for all 8, or some of them didn't apply and didn't get something either because, as you said, they may have had a conflict or their provider didn't win, but they are truly underserved in a broad way? So I just wondered, of the 8 left, right, are half of them in that we're in good shape and the other half are not, or is it more skewed than that?
Either 3 or 4 counties had no great grant applications at all, right? One of those, Lenore, was the site of a major federal award to Global Transpark. And so that county was basically completely off the map for federal funding purposes. Mecklenburg had no great grant applications. Brunswick, and one of the 2 counties in the northwest of the state, and forgive me, I'm blanking on which one. Also, there were no great grant applications, and we think that's because the coverage is really pretty thorough there. There's not much for the internet providers to bite off. Now, that said, those counties will still be eligible for the Completing Access to Broadband program, right? So we know, even though there wasn't a great grant applicant, we still know there are pockets of unserved areas and more often underserved areas in those counties, and they will have an opportunity to move forward. I think 2 counties, Rockingham and Watauga, I believe, use their American Rescue Plan funds on a broadband infrastructure project. Absent our participation, they will not be eligible. If they move forward and spend federal funding for that purpose, they will not be eligible either to be the site of a great grant applicant, great grant award to an internet provider, or be a participant as a county in the CAB program.
Fantastic. I had one more question. I also want to echo, though, what Joe described as what a great presentation this was. It might be interesting down the road if we had kind of the update of the maps that I think it's Sarah Jane does, that show, what our broadband actually looks like in terms of penetration into homes, just to kind of give us a visual about where we're aiming. This was great as what you've done, but where we're aiming and where we see the kind of goalpost, right, 2 or 3 years out. Toward that, my second question was actually about whether or how, and I know you do this, but can you reassure us? I know MCNC is also applying for some of those federal funds. I know you guys coordinate closely, but I just want to kind of get a sense of, how are we doing that in a way that doesn't tangle up redundancies if they might not be productive or necessary. And thanks.
Yeah. you're right about mapping. Stephanie Jane Edwards has joined our team from MCNC and is our mapping expert, working closely, I should say, with the Center for Geographic Information Analysis in GDAC. So we lean on their expertise heavily for this program as well. We're in the process of getting our license in place with FCC's mapping vendor to participate in that program, and we'll be we've already started communicating with internet providers across the state who had to submit new, more granular mapping information to the FCC by September 1st to actually just get their data. The FCC is going to go through an iterative process, including a kind of nationwide protest, before they've got fully baked, granular, location-specific maps. We're trying to get the exact same data and jumpstart them, right? Especially for the CAB program, even if there's still some kinks to work out in that mapping. So yes, glad to come back and present as that more granular view of who's got access and who's adopting comes into focus. Glad to talk about that with the board. On the coordination question, right now there are 3 bipartisan infrastructure law funding programs that are up and running. One is the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity and Access and Deployment Program. That's $42 billion. We're going to get a formula share of that. For only states or territories or the appropriate state government administering entity may play in that pot right now. So there's no one but DIT is going after those funds right now. There's the Digital Equity Planning Grant Program that I mentioned as well, that we applied for, that is only open to state or territory governor designated administering entities, for which it's the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. The one that's open to a broader pool right now from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is the Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure Program. And we anticipate a number of applicants from North Carolina. There is a coordinating requirement in the notice of funding opportunity. So we've gone out to our stakeholder listserv and all of our provider relationships and many of the kind of anchor institutions and other entities that might apply for those funds and said, look, we're here. If you're going after it, you need to coordinate with us. We've had a number of conversations with those likely applicants. That application is due at the end of this month. And so we are tracking that closely and are available to work with any applicant about kind of mapping their application, figuring out what they're addressing and what last mile providers they'll be working with, and figuring out how a given proposal fits into our broader strategy here on connecting all of North Carolina. I should mention there's also, of course, the RDOF and Reconnect programs, so FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and USDA's Reconnect program. We don't have a formal coordination role there, but for Reconnect in particular, we often work directly with applicants to get an endorsement letter from either our office or from the governor, right, and make sure that USDA knows that we're supporting every possible applicant for broadband funding here across the state.
Okay, and then Tracy, just to go back to one of your comments as well around, are we achieving the results we're hoping for? So one of the things that, you know, again, we're trying to get the funding out the door, get the providers out there doing the great work in the communities. What we're trying to then start ascertain is, can we get down to that granular level of data? Are we making a difference in the metrics and the objectives the governor gave to us, right? So are we getting to 100% of households with school-age children getting connected? Are we getting to 80% connectivity across all racial subdivisions? So we're not quite there yet to get to that level of granularity, but we're hoping to continue to work for that. And I know that's very much on Nate's radar as well, because ultimately that's some of the things that we're going to have to report out on. How are we making a difference at the end of the day? Let's see. Is there any other questions for Nate? Okay, if not, I'll tell you just real quick, my visit out at Terrell's school district yesterday, in Terrell County in particular, I did ask them if there was one thing that we could do for them, what would it be? And unanimously came across the board, get us connected. Their one resource officer they had there, he was on an extended DSL connection. He was lucky if he was getting a meg down. He is now connected to an Starlink connection, and he's getting 100 meg, as an example. The school board president told me that she's got to go outside and almost walk to the one cornfield. They live on a farm, for her to be able to. So at night she's out walking with a headlamp, because apparently she gets bears to come up and occupy her porch. So for safety and all that, it's just interesting what you learn. But without any hesitancy, it was about connectivity. And why this is so important, and we're going to transition over into our cyber discussion here. Yesterday, I had the opportunity of meeting a young lady who, at the age of 17, she just turned 17. She is now a high school graduate and also has an associate's degree. She is now working in the school district. Her goal is to become a teacher. She's going to try to move forward to become a teacher's assistant. She's going through doing her required hours in classroom and different things. Her mom still has to sign everything for employment. The school district even acknowledged that they had to go back and look at statute to see what age could be in what classroom, because she just did turn 17. But this is the kind of caliber of people we have across the state. And the high school principal was there yesterday. And as much as we talk about ACP, I also talk about Cyber Start America and getting our youth interested in cyber, getting our youth interested in data analytics and some of these other things. And unfortunately, everybody lumps them into STEM. We have a STEM program. We work with our community college, and I'm like, but not everybody needs to be in STEM to be able to participate in these IT perceived fields. In fact, most of us probably are not from a STEM background to begin with, and yet, as I indicated, musicians are some of the most brilliant people to work in IT because they're structured, but they're also outside the box thinkers, and bring a lot to the organization. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move over to Jeff for an update on cyber. And Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I guess the thing, welcome from Birmingham, Alabama this morning. And it's kind of interesting looking at the audience. I mean, we have over 60 plus people that sit in and participate in this committee hearing, and I didn't realize it was that many. I know it was a large number, but for all the DIT staff folks that are on listening this morning and taking time out of your schedule to stay updated, I want you to know that I think from all of us and the Oversight Board, we appreciate what you do for the citizens of this great state and the tremendous resource and expertise that you guys bring to all of us. With that, also from the cyber committee side, I want to just recognize real quickly, we add participants from time to time that come in and join us that have obviously interest and are working in the cyber field and cybersecurity from a lot of the agencies around the state and other entities such as the counties, municipalities, National Guard. But recently, our chief privacy officer for the state, Sherry Gibbons, we welcome her to this, and we recognize that privacy is a complement to the cybersecurity needs, and it is a tremendous gift that we have her as a resource to participate with us. So again, Sherry, thank you for being part of our group and setting in. A couple specific things that we're going to talk about. Going to give you a little bit of background on the education pathways. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on the whole estate effort. And then we're going to talk about some of the very specific things that we're touching on and actually overlap a little bit with the digital transformation and the initiatives they're doing that get us thinking from a cybersecurity things that we need to pay attention to. And then we'll talk a little bit about a sample of that. Some of you may, at the very end, talking about the Los Angeles Unified School District, and again, elaborate on that a little bit. And then want to talk about just our reporting responsibility, something I want to challenge our committee with at the very end, and we'll talk about it. One of the things, if we jump back, and I'll jump into the education pathways for a minute, is all the things that we're doing right now in the cybersecurity committee, and Rob may speak on it a little bit. We'll turn the floor to him and a couple of our folks that are working on the education pathways. Is the governor formalized, the joint task force in our area? And Jim, if you can speak to that, or Rob, just for a moment and update us on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, hey Jeff, I'm going to have to do it very quietly because I'm losing my voice. Apologies. So Executive Order 254, for those of you not familiar, formalized the task force on the 16th of March earlier this year. And the two distinct sections of the executive order, the first being the formalization language, the second being areas of strong encouragement for our critical infrastructure and key resources partners in North Carolina on how to best partner with the JCTF and how the JCTF can best partner with them. Areas include providing visibility of their public spacing environments for proactive monitoring, the reporting of incidents as they are confirmed, and then also allowing the strong encouragement to allow critical infrastructure partners to allow the JCTF to support them in their response and recovery efforts for incidents. Back over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, sir. So under the education pathways, we're really focused on working in conjunction with two bodies, one being the community college system, which is represented through Patrick Fleming, and then the UNC system, who is represented within our committee, Keith Werner, and both basically serve as co-chairs leading this. And these are guys that are rolling up their sleeve and basically taking on another half-time job on top of everything else they have responsibilities to do to bring this initiative to fruition. I'm going to just touch on a couple quick things under the education pathways, and then I'll ask Patrick or Keith if either one has anything they would like to contribute. But we're really focused on what's the curriculum, what are the certifications, what are the internships we need to bring to bear to be able to address the workforce needs around cybersecurity. We know there's, I think I saw a report in 18 months, there'll be over 2 million open cybersecurity positions nationwide. And really there's an impetus to be the provider, the top provider of those skill sets out of our educational bodies across the state. So in that effort, we need to be able to identify what are the skill requirements that companies and organizations and even the state will need to address those needs. So addressing the needs as terms of where are the jobs within enterprises, within the state, within agencies that we need to bring to bear, both long-term, but actually we're trying to back that up and understand what's the immediate needs. Do we have open positions that are being posted that we need to find skill sets or bring people up to skills? And then in conjunction with since these are both our community college system and our 16 university systems, is to understand, are there potential scholarship opportunities? And we've been having discussions of things like what East Carolina does with Brody in the medical school, where if you come and work, go to school, go to med school, and you stay and work in a rural community, we forgive your tuition. Are those kinds of opportunities that we're looking to explore? And then the last thing around the education pathways, just as a quick update, is we will end up formalizing this effort almost into an actual project initiative. We've already begun discussing and looking to assign a full-time lead as a project manager over this entire effort. So with that, I don't know, Patrick or Keith, if either one of you are on and want to add anything.
Good morning, Jeff. I don't know if Patrick's on this morning, so I will do my best to cover it for both of us. But I will note that we have made some, I think, some pretty good incremental progress. I think this is not insignificant by any means, but it may seem so. But we have identified and inventoried all the research centers within the UNC system, as well as all the cybersecurity programs. I believe Patrick and his team have done the same thing, and as Rob noted in one of our committee meetings, this is not insignificant, and a lot of states struggle with this. So I think it's a good platform and a good beginning. So something I think we are both excited about. Obviously, we're trying to make this as seamless as possible for our students. Considerable work with OSHR. I would invite Rob to speak up if he can. If not, Rob, I can help you out. But A significant part of this is working with OSHR and considering things like educational requirements, classifications, comp, and speed to market. So, we want to make sure that we're very targeted on what our next steps are. As Jeff mentioned, securing project management support, continuing to refine our scope, identifying pilot opportunities, and deploying. But since our last committee meeting, I've done a couple of things specifically. One is I have met with our Project Kitty Hawk folks. They're going to be a critical player from an employer engagement perspective and from kind of courses or collective courses and curriculum. So I think they could be a critical player. I've also met with our military's affairs staff within the system office. They're excited about some potential involvement here. Obviously, military could be a huge inclusion to our program. So with that, Rob, I'd invite you to come back in, talk about the OSHR piece.
Yes, certainly. And just want to put a pin on that military comment that you just made. Early on, we identified target populations to participate in the fellowship program. And those target populations include, but aren't limited to, North Carolina's rising high school students about to embark upon their collegiate efforts, as well as career transitioning folks, whether they be in a skill that is not compatible with the digital economy that we're driving towards. But the last population are transitioning military members. North Carolina has a huge population of actively serving military members in addition to National Guards people and reservists. So identifying those populations and to include military spouses who have served their country as well in following their spouse in their many different duty stations, uprooting their careers and really putting their professional lives on hold while they do so. I mean, I know Secretary Weaver has a particular special place in his heart, and I don't know if you want to chime in here, sir.
No, I was going to chime in and if you didn't mention that, so thank you for mentioning it. But, again, I'm a military brat myself, and I watched my mom, who was a very professional woman, not be able to get a job because the mentality was, well, you're moving in every 2 years, kind of mentality, and that we need to make sure that we're taking care of our military spouses as much as the focus on the military member themselves. It's the same ecosystems, the same ethos, integrity, all those kind of great traits that our military members and families do bring to the table. So, and we do have an intern here right now who is a military spouse working in Rob's office. So again, it's just an area that's near and dear, as Rob said. I do have, since you gave me the door to open up. So Keith, and I know that, by the way, Keith, congratulations on the new role. And this came up yesterday as we were talking with the school district out in Terrell. How are we messaging to students that are dual enrolled? And I don't know how many high school students are dual enrolled, maybe in the UNC system, but it does appear that community colleges, and again, I was beneficial of that too back in my younger day as well, because it seems like the theme I got yesterday is those very the kids that we're really after, those high school students right now, are dual enrolled and are spending more time in the community college than they are at their high school. And we're missing out on them, I think, on how we message about opportunities around CyberStart America and some of these other things. Is there something we could be doing differently, or how could we message differently to make sure that we're getting those dual enrolled high school students that are already embarked upon their collegiate career?
Yeah, two things. I think one is this would be a major part of our communication plan. And this coordinating resource, I think, is really going to help us solidify what that communication plan is. But as I understand it too, Jim, is the legislature gave My Futures NC some money about a year ago to look at some of this interoperability between DPI and the community colleges. And I think that study and that review is underway. So it may be worth our while just to focus back in with My Futures and Cecilia Holden and that organization and make sure we're tying all of this together. Because I think they're looking specifically at this dual enrollment piece that you're talking about.
Yeah, like I said, when I look at that young lady yesterday I met, 17 years old, high school graduate, and a 2-year college degree already.
Yeah, it's impressive, by the way.
It's very impressive, and that talent exists. But when you look at our award winners from CyberStar, and by the way, we're very happy with our award win, but all but 3 of them were from 30 minutes of Raleigh.
Yeah.
We got nothing east or west. We got talented people out there.
Agreed.
So,
Okay.
I think the final thought on the military community aspect of our Cyber Fellows Pathway Initiative, I think we can all agree that all military branches are in scope, but the Air Force is a superior branch. Now, as we jump over to OSHR, the work I've been doing to date with them is specifically aligning a proper class specification to facilitate the apprenticeship component to the Pathways Initiative within state service. And that's going to be very important as we move forward to ensure that we have the mechanisms in place that can support the onboarding or the apprenticeships for these individuals that are in our pipeline. And that work is continuing. Keith, back to you.
I think you summed it up well, Rob. Back to you, Jeff.
All right.
And my apologies for Rob's misguided comment there.
Well, as a sidebar to close out the education pathways, and we talk about the skill sets and stuff, I work with hospitals all around the country, and one of the things I always advise our boards is when you're addressing cybersecurity issues and or very, very complex technical issues, you need to make sure you have a gifted 14-year-old under contract. So it is amazing the talent level and the level of expertise, and we need to, feed off that and leverage that to everyone's advantage. Next area that we're going to talk about is whole estate, and that's basically just the concept. How do we look at cybersecurity from the highest level of the pyramid all the way down to all the smallest components? And as the cliche goes, you're only as strong as your weakest link, correct? And so we have, as a group, been focused on, and this subgroup topic is to look at, okay, what are the weakest links that expose us as a state? And it's the entities and enterprises that interact with us that aren't necessarily the state agencies, but either are required to pass us data and information or are online and downloading information from us. One of the initial focus areas that we are working with and looking at is how do we deal with the smaller counties? Because we've got a number of the small counties, maybe as many as 30, that have exposures from a cyber protection perspective. Randy Kress, who may be on, but participates with us in our group, leads that on a statewide basis as a county manager on the IT side and looking at initiatives that we do. But what we find, or we are finding that we run into, as you show up from the state agency to some small county operation and they go, oh, you're from the state, we really don't need your help. And the reality is they don't really sometimes recognize what they do need and how we can help them and provide a resource that they really don't have access to be able to afford or have staffed. So we're working on what are the minimum things that make it affordable for these entities and enterprises to put up a degree of protection, firewalls, what have you, against malware, ransomware, those activities, how to help educate on phishing and those types of things. But it's also, we're talking internally, okay, for some of these, it's, how do we identify and outline approaches? And I'll say politely, get them to voluntarily participate in moving forward with some of this activity to protect everybody on the long scale. And it's, it's a little bit, sometimes it's going to be the carrot, sometimes it's going to be the stick, but ultimately, which has been successful, and I guess with a large crowd, we need to be careful with this. I always get in trouble, but the state does control a lot of funding to the counties and municipalities, and being able to work with them on those allocations as ways to direct some of it to the right immediate needs that have a priority for everyone. So that's kind of the big thing there. Anything, Rob, you would want to add on whole estate?
Yeah, Jeff, I want to call it a couple of things. So as we have just recently been provided the NOFO from the IIJA. The IIJA is really, I hesitate to call it a once in a lifetime funding opportunity, but it is a significant funding opportunity to truly affect whole estate capabilities, or to deploy whole estate capabilities, whether they are as a pass-through to or to the benefit of the local governments. I want to call attention to the recent ransomware incident out in the Los Angeles Unified School District as an example of one jurisdiction's reaction to a cyber incident. And now I'll leave the commentary out as to whether or not it was the best reaction, or the reaction that was made as the best option at the time. There was reportings in the media that there's particular contract allowances that are being afforded to the CIO, or I think it's the CIO for the Unified School District, that allows that individual to bypass procurement rules within the state of California to rapidly onboard technologies to respond to and prevent future attacks, respond to the current attack and prevent future attacks. The point I'm trying to make here is that no matter what whole estate effort we roll out that includes a capability, something to purchase off the shelf, sourced otherwise, no matter of prevention can really close the human risk gap. So cyber education has to be a component of all whole estate efforts. And that cyber education component could and should mirror the requirements that we have on executive branch agencies to conduct or to complete bi-monthly cyber awareness and training, to include role-based training for particular areas of expertise within agencies. So I just want to call attention to the cyber education component as a necessary component to whole estate efforts.
Thanks, Rob. And picking up on, some of the conversations that we're having internally, and obviously the staff continues under Rob's leadership, is things like the LA School District is to recognize. I don't know if a lot of you recall a few years ago when Target was hacked and got all the customer data. If anybody, since we got a large group, how they got in was through the computerized HVAC system. We see people ransomware and stuff that are coming in through toner cartridges. If there's enough chip space to load malware on a toner, and they'll put an empty toner cartridge on a network-based printer, and off it goes. Well, the issue we have here and trying to pay attention to is this weakest link also occurs internally when you look at a school system, whether you have a Wake County or a Mecklenburg County. Mecklenburg County has 140,000 students. It has access to PowerSchool, which runs through DPI, and EVOS, which is the evaluation system that's housed at SAS. And I feel a lot more comfortable with the stuff that's running at SAS. But the fact is, if you go in and you're being hacked into a school system, they go in through PowerSchool, all of a sudden, guess who's looking up on PowerSchool? It's parents. Oftentimes, not atypically, because depending on the nature of the employer of that parent, they may be using a work laptop. And all of a sudden you're into different things. Can you get into, then if you're into the school, then you're into health data. All of a sudden, are you accessing DHHS files and PHI information and HIPAA protected data? Are you then also having access to financial data by going into DOR and getting tax records of an individual? So the weakest link is only a gateway to getting into the most sensitive and private data that we have a fiduciary and responsibility to protect throughout the state. So it's something we absolutely are thinking about and paying attention to from a cybersecurity. And then there's the initiatives going on in the digital transformation, which I get my nerd on really well with what you guys are doing on that side, because it is spectacular. And what the governor's priorities are, it's for anybody that's got the nerd streak in them, it's impossible not to get excited with what's going on. But as we look at virtual IDs, virtual driver's licenses, kind of that digital certificate, how do we protect that? You've got identity management issues. We were even talking about our ability to move away from wet signatures, join the 21st century, but what's again, security around that? And obviously for us, even on the cyber side, on a microcosm is, how are we going to track spend across agencies and departments at least on the cyber, so we're not replicating, duplicating efforts, that we maximize and optimize that spend in that area. So those are some of the things that we're spending time on that side. And then the last side, which I just want to call attention, is I think a responsibility for the board members is, per statute, we're required to kind of report status, for lack of a better way to categorize it, back to the General Assembly. And that really falls ultimately on Jim's shoulders, but he's got two responsibilities, and we have a responsibility to help him as committee members. One, what he's reporting to JLOC as a cabinet secretary. That's one view and vision, but we have a responsibility of request of categories of things. We're to report status, create our opinions, ours view as board, and then that's under signature of our chair, which is Jim, which is good because then we have synergies across that. But at some point, and that's not for today, but it's next board meeting, whenever, we just need to make sure we fulfill that obligation, statutory obligation is all, and to call it to everybody's attention. And I don't have the answer on how we best do that, most efficiently do that, but I know we need to do that. So with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share, and our group to share what we're doing.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Just for the group's reminder, the Iija funding, and we talked a lot about the NOFO dropping today. What we believe is there for North Carolina, the $1 billion, is 26.4 million. That would be over 4 federal fiscal years. Federal fiscal year 1 would be about 5.6 million. I think that doubles to almost 10.7 million in year 2, and then it goes back down. But over the 4 federal fiscal years, there's escalating cost match requirements. So year 1's 10%, year 2 is 20, year 3 is 30, and year 4 is 40. So again, as I said, we're trying to digest that and see. So while I kind of agree with Rob, it's not like once in a lifetime, it's not transformational. It's not going to have the impact like broadband's having, as an example. But it is funding that's out there for us to maybe do some things a little bit differently and bring things together the appropriate way here in North Carolina. So we're going to do our best to maximize and make that work. So with that said, we've these been our 2 primary subcommittees for the 18 months that I've been here in the role. A couple months ago, we started a 3rd subcommittee, and that was really as we're starting to approach the upcoming budget cycle for the upcoming budget biennium. How do we start leveraging the talented people that are part of the ITSB to start looking at criteria and the weighting criteria as we look at IT projects and the expansion budget process moving forward. Last year in the short session, we were able to do some small things. And now we've been very collaboratively working with our partners in OSBM, talking about how we would like to see this, crawl, walk, run, to use a military term. I forgot Chair Force doesn't crawl at all, so they don't probably have a concept of what that means. But as we're crawling along here right now and starting to mature and evolve a little bit, now we want to do a little bit more as we look at how do we put forward recommendations for the governor's consideration on IT project funding requests. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. She's been doing a lot of work in this area. So Sarah, take it away, please.
Thank you, Secretary Weaver. Yeah, so for the past few months, we've been very lucky to be able to work with Jeff Tart, Keith Warner, and Keith Briggs on this committee. It's not always the most exciting or sexiest topic of conversation, but it has a huge impact on the way we run business in North Carolina. And I am very grateful to them and their participation. I also would be remiss if I didn't say we've partnered very closely with OSBM. We couldn't do any of this without them. So Director Bruce, if you're here, thank you. Thank you for your team's time. They've been amazing. So Julie, if you can go to the next slide. One more. There we go. So just a little background real quick. In the state's budget manual and in general statute, it is required that agencies that provide or ask for IT expansion, the review of that should be done both by the state CIO's office and by the budget office. We're supposed to work in conjunction to help the governor make informed decisions on what goes into the recommended budget. budget process is a very long and time-consuming process, and adding this additional hiccup to it isn't always appreciated. And so for a while, it kind of fell by the wayside. And I've talked to you a little bit about that in the past, but in the short session, we reignited the work, and I think you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And we ran a pilot, and this pilot was basically a survey that was attached to the OSBM expansion budget process. Luckily, it was good that we did the pilot in the short session. There were 30 plus requests, and they ranged widely in scope, cost, and completeness. So for example, we got some requests that were a couple $1,000s for training. And then we got a request for $50 million for a new human capital management system. And it's hard because they're all provided on the same documentation. They all have this basically the same amount of room to write. And so you're left with a lot of information to consume and then kind of weed through in a short period of time. And the state CIO's job it's not their job to recommend or tell the governor which things to fund, but more to prioritize and help make more informed decisions. So if you go to the next slide, we created this committee. Well, so first lessons learned from the short session. First of all, CIOs and CFOs do not communicate as well as we would hope. And I think all of you can probably relate to that in some way, shape, or form. And so we had situations where CFOs filled out these IT surveys. You could tell which ones were filled out by CFOs, and the CIOs had no knowledge whatsoever of the expansion request. And then you had some situations where CIOs would call and say, did the CFO submit this because they were wanting an expansion request to be put forward, and it was actually a super mission critical request, but their CFO wasn't in lockstep with them and didn't ask for it. And the way the process works is if the CFO isn't asking for it, the CIO isn't going to get a chance to explain themselves and why they need it. So part of this really critical part of the process that isn't necessarily part of the committee's job, but OSBM and DIT's job to figure out, we would love any insight the board has on how to do it, but is to get the CIOs and the CFOs to on the same page, because so many of the big requests that are coming forward are IT requests, but they're not explained in a way, either the CIO is explaining it in a way that the business can't understand it, or the CFO is explaining it in a way that doesn't articulate the severity or significance of the request. Part of that can be helped by the way we ask questions and the definitions we put forward so that they can better understand what it is we're looking for and why we're looking for it. So one of the lessons learned is we needed to have better definitions. Example of that is we use the word project a lot or solution. And many of the requests that come forward are neither of those things. So we had to replace that word with IT request, because it could have been that they needed additional cybersecurity resources, or they needed to refresh their laptops because they were entirely out of compliance. And those are not solutions or projects, but they're really critical. And and they weren't flagged this time around because they didn't fall under the category of solution or project, and agencies didn't necessarily know to provide them as IT requests. Related to that, there were we asked a lot of questions, but didn't necessarily get the information we needed. So part of this next phase after the pilot was to figure out a better way to ask the questions so that we could allow the CIOs and the agencies to showcase the information that they were actually trying to provide us, so that we could then in turn make a more informed decision. And lastly, more of a silly thing, not silly, but OSBM sat through a whole lot of very detailed DIT conversations with our very diligent and dedicated and very detailed oriented IT people who threw a whole bunch of acronyms back and forth at each other, and kind of overwhelmed our budget office partners, not because they weren't capable of understanding, but because we were talking in a way that they couldn't relate to, and nor do they need to know, because they're there to make the decisions on the budget side, and they don't need to know about all the widgets and digits and things that we talk about that are important to us and are critical in decision making, but not necessarily translate to a way that the budget office could understand. So part of this too, going forward, is figuring out a way to make the sausage without showing the entire process to them, but giving them enough information so that they are empowered enough to go and then make the pitch to the budget director and the general and the governor and the General Assembly. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we created this committee. And again, thank you, Jeff, Keith, and Keith. We also had people from DIT, including myself, Glenn Poplowski, and Caitlin Mullen, and then Jonathan Meyer and Sean Ryan from the budget office. Again, they were amazing to work with. The purpose of this committee, first and foremost, was to help us set prioritization criteria. And we believe that was important because so there's different colors of money. There's an IT fund, there's a highway fund that has one source of funding. We have federal funds. We have receipts from, like, when you buy a hunting license, that's another source of funding. And then there's state appropriation dollars, which are from our tax dollars that come to the state. And they're all used differently and appropriated differently. And so we needed to come up with a way to help prioritize, kind of level the playing field a little bit, but also to explain ourselves better from a business perspective. So it wasn't good enough to say, yeah, we really need a new human capital management system, but for what reason, what purpose, why do we need it? And not because the other one's old, but what does that mean? Like, why? And so in order to do that, we needed to sort of split things apart and look at them from different lenses or perspectives. And so that's what this committee did. They looked at our lessons learned, they looked at the questions we asked last time around, and they helped us kind of put things into 4 specific buckets, so that then when we go and we do tell the budget office or the governor's office what it is that we recommend or we think are important, we can prioritize them in these 4 buckets, so that, because we haven't yet figured out a way to prioritize, let's say, constituent impact the same way we would prioritize risk. They're completely different. And depending on the governor's priorities at any given time, he may want to focus on constituent impact or focus on risk, and we need to be able to articulate all of these initiatives from different perspectives. So I'm lucky enough to have this committee agree to continue on and help us, after the long session, go through lessons learned and repeat the cycle and hopefully mature as we go. This is definitely, as Jim mentioned, a crawl, walk, run. And it's not just a crawl, walk, run for us, but also for the agencies. And we have to make sure that we are carrying them along with us and that they understand our process and why we're doing what we're doing. So if you go to the next slide, these are the 4 criteria. So strategic impact, is it aligned with the governor's priorities? Is it aligned with the agency's mission and vision? Is it aligned to the statewide IT strategy that's been put forward? Constituent impact, Tracy, really close to what you guys do. Digital transformation will have a huge play in this space. Risk and includes security and integrations. That's an obvious one. And then the 4th one, separate from constituent impact, is the internal government efficiencies or cost savings. And And all four of those are things that we can articulate in a way that the budget office, the governor's office, and the General Assembly will understand. But they're also things that we can then in turn explain to our CIOs from a technical perspective why they're significant. So I don't remember if I have another slide after this. Yeah, super high level. Here's the process that we'll be going through this year. So the committee, thank you again, came up with these criteria. The agencies will then ask a series of questions that map to these 4 criteria. And then those responses will come to us and to the budget office. We'll review and do our analysis and then give recommendations to the budget office and subsequently to the governor's office. Jeff, Keith, please chime in with any additional insights that you would like to provide, and any questions I'm happy to answer.
Well, while we have the awkward pause there, let me chime in on something because that's usually Keith's excited look right there. So as we did the review internally with our optimized agency CIOs and then the CIO population in general, I think the one question we got asked, just for everyone's awareness, is what is a significant project, or explain significant. And the one thing I want to make sure of, and I'm kind of saying this so the group maybe can input, or you guys can think about it and maybe come back to Sarah or the smaller team at a later time. I don't want significant to be driven by a dollar amount because, you know, again, I've 29 years of my career was spent in human services. $1 million project for HHS is like a $50,000 project for a small agency. It can't be driven by dollar amounts, but somehow we have to start looking at risk. And how do we incorporate a risk profile when taking a look at these initiatives? And a risk profile could be from the project, the initiative itself, how it's funded, executive stakeholdering, project leadership engagement, the capability or the ability of the agency to deliver on that, past track record as an example. So I don't know what all of that, I'm just naming a few out there, but if there's some way that we could probably get a better handle or definition around significant that drives us towards a risk profile, I think that would be very helpful as we move forward to the next phases of this effort. But again, I want to thank the team here for taking this on. This is always hard when we're talking about change and influencing some outcomes. So I appreciate your due diligence in making this happen. And well, does anybody have any questions, comments?
This is Keith. If I can make one response, Secretary, to your point about the risk profile, I will say that in all the effort that went on to get to the point where Sarah was presenting, there were numerous points in discussion around data, metrics, and analytics. And I think your risk profile plays well into that, right? So I think the maturity model of this has to include that, right? It's got to give telemetry not only on behalf of the state agency or department and what they're doing, you know, understanding better what they're doing, but it also has to give telemetry to, you know, kind of the necessary weights and balances to get there, right, from a funding model. So whether or not that's you, whether or not that's the governor, whether or not it's the legislature, and I think having, you know, real data is going to help that. So I think that's continued topic that we have to get to.
Okay.
Related, it's kind of the flip side of that too. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that many of the things we're seeing are software as a service, and they don't cost very much, but they have a huge impact. And so again, Jim's point about cost not being the trigger or shouldn't be the trigger, that's part of the reason we have these 4 criteria, right? Because risk is a trigger, but citizen impact should be a trigger. And how much money we can save or how much more efficiently we do something should be a trigger. Like it should be, the budget office likes to know if something will save us money. Like that's, and if a small amount of investment will save us a lot of money, but it kind of falls through the cracks because nobody was looking at it, that would be a shame as well.
Okay. Tracy, since you were on time for the meeting this morning, you get to go next.
Why, thank you. This is the other side of the coin. First, great information and great presentation to us, Sarah, and to those who, Jeff and Keith and others, Keith, who are leading this. It's great to see. I just wanted to note explicitly, and I think it's already implicit, what we talked about with technical functional partnerships and how we would maybe need to govern in the future the digital transformation at the broad statewide level. There's a whole lot of overlap, I think, with what you've described, and the fact that all of us as IT people speak a different language, and we need translators to help with that, or we need to start translating our own language better. I would observe that that's not a problem for DIT solely. It's a problem for all of us in IT. Many of us see it all the time, and getting our IT people to think outside, right, that box of the thing they live and breathe, to start to translate it is, I think, a noble effort, but one that will take some time. The only other one I wanted to kind of comment on, and you didn't explicitly mention what is a IT centric kind of phrasing, but what I've found resonates pretty well with people is talking about technical debt. I wonder if that might be another category for you as you present things, to have, yes, there are requests, yes, there are projects, and technical debt might then help lead directly into that risk component, even if the ticket is big sometime. So that's it. Great job. Nice to see this effort.
Yeah, and let me touch on that one, Tracy, because I think you have to know things before you can actually action things. And I think Glenn and Keith here in his new role as our Enterprise Architecture Innovation Director, and the work they have underway right now is we're starting to get our hands around what is it that we have out there. And so where are those opportunities? How can we start addressing? And again, goes back to me, like it goes back to risk again. It's minimizing the risk. How are we addressing, as an example, I don't consider the mainframe as, a legacy debt. If the mainframe's on a current operating system, financial systems and institutions use mainframes all the time, it's a viable technology. But, when we look at some of the other things, is the mainframe still being used for purposes that other areas would be better consumed to provide that and get us to a better output for our residents or businesses of the state, then that's where we have to start talking about, how are we enhancing and engaging that citizen experience differently. So I think the work efforts that are underway between Keith and Glenn, where it's going to get us to the point now where we have a good idea of what our inventory looks like. We have a good idea of the technology that's underpinning that inventory. And to your point, then, how do we start addressing that? Or as we're looking at funding requests coming from agencies, being able to ask some of those more pointed questions. I'll just go back to my days in Pennsylvania. Our Department of Banking had a mission critical application built on Cold Fusion, and only one person in the agency and really in the state knew Cold Fusion. Right? That's a huge risk, right? And it had to get addressed. But so we have to be able to get to that analytics and analysis. I think that's where Keith was coming from as well, to be able to start looking at this data and starting to identify where those opportunities are. Because, our IT leadership and IT teams in the agencies, they're so heads down trying to get stuff done, especially with all those federal dollars coming in. I think we're losing sight sometimes of where are our gaps and our holes and our vulnerabilities. And so that's kind of what we want to start as we do that shift over to governance and strategy design transition. That's where we want to really, I think that's where our agency can bring a lot of value into the process overall. So that's hopefully where we're going to be able to start influencing those opportunities and getting to different outcomes.
Related to the crawl, walk, run. So we have an enterprise portfolio management tool, and that's the tool that both Keith and Glenn will be working on to populate and get the information we need. But as a first step, this time around, we're hoping with the expansion process is to collect the information and put it in this tool so that, for example, there's a drop down now that says, one of the questions is your request replacing an existing application? Yes. Okay. Then you get a drop down of all the applications from your agency, and you're going to tell us which one it is that it's being replaced, which application is being replaced, so that we can say, oh, well, that one is really old and needs to be replaced for these reasons. And we have that information in hand. It's also great for the budget office because they can look in theory to see how much that application costs year over year to determine how much operations and maintenance money needs to be appropriated to cover the new solution. But it's things like that that we're trying baby steps to get there. But any additional insights on how would be very appreciated.
Yeah, where we're at right now is the 4 criteria that Sarah went over. I mean, they're almost basically equally weighted. And I think as we mature, we can get to additional criteria and a weighting of those criteria. And maybe one biennial cycle, there's going to be an emphasis on certain areas, and maybe another cycle, there'll be an emphasis and more emphasis in somewhere else. But what we're hoping to do is get to something that's modular, flexible, but the framework is there. We're still within the framework. This is the criteria. And so that way, as we're working with our agency partners, they understand what it is and what they're going to have to go within, and then we can account for whatever the recommendations are for weighting of criteria from domain to domain, I guess is the best way of putting it. Jeff, you got your hand up, sir?
Yes, and I was just going to say, I'm going to state a couple comments that all the IT people will all know. Hopefully we'll shake their head in agreement, but regardless, we'll understand. And we're sort of talking around what you mentioned, but I think particularly from the legislators that are looking at appropriating funds and looking at, reviewing projects that are underway, the big one is, Sarah, what you're referring to is the legacy systems that get replaced. And there's a long history that is a predecessor to most of us on the committee, but I think foundationally, we have to figure out from purely just a risk management, let alone project management, budget management, but from a risk management, understanding and doing a better job on starting with the RFP, finishing with the contract and the language, which we've not historically done well. There's big disconnects, but it's around really doing a nice job, tight job on defining scope, defining deliverables, right? And more importantly, non-performance parameters around that. How do we get to it? Because just as a couple examples, we had a project years ago with in DOR, the TIMS, the Tax Information Management System. We got years into it, got 90% to the goal line, and they came back and said, won't work. They literally threw it in the trash can and signed which I don't ever understand, but they signed an agreement and nobody would say bad things about either party. But wasted $80 million in several years. Then when we went to put in the new Medicare management system, we contracted and bought the system from New York. It was sold and purchased based on the due diligence that demonstrated it would be an 80% fit with 20% customization to the program. $400 million cost overrun later, and several years late, we find it was a reverse of that ratio, right? And then no way to recoup that. And then there's subtle things from a risk management, which needs to be a state standard, almost legislatively mandated, coming out of the big six, functioning as a QA partner on large, complex projects where you remove it, you come in to assess and help the team identify. And I know Tracy and Joe understand this process, but so in a review kind of post fact, I asked for a copy of the QA papers and reports from the project team from the vendor doing the work. And the partner basically said, we're not sharing those. You can't have them and you can't look at them, which is all, if you're following during the process, could sure help alleviate a lot of problems. And that just makes no sense. He says, well, I've negotiated the contract. I should not be penalized for negotiating the contract to absolutely our benefit and not the state's. It's not a good attitude, but I go, okay. I understand that, but those kinds of things we need to incorporate so we're tracking from a risk management perspective, large systems. I don't know if we really do that well. So anyway, that's the comment. Scope, deliverables, contracting has to be tighter. And certain level size projects should require a formal independent QA review by the vendor and internal folks. Just seems to me
Jeff, just to touch base on a couple of your comments there. So no disagreement with you whatsoever. And in fact, most most large scale efforts that have federal dollars involved will require an IB&V component as part of that. What again, this goes back to the risk thing though. So as you look at it in today's technological world, multi-year large projects have a greater propensity for cost overrun. I don't want to use the failure word, but as things progress along and take forever and ever to get done, change management occurs all the time. The answer can't be go all the way over the other side of the spectrum and we're going to do everything agile, because you still at the end of the day have a workforce that's out there using this equipment, and the workforce can't be sitting in training rooms all the time learning about the latest functionality change that got put in place. They still got a day job to do. So somewhere it's going to be, there's not a silver bullet. It's, I jokingly call it Wagile. Somehow it's going to be a hybrid approach of how we do things, and depending upon I think Agile has a phenomenal role, but at the end of the day, if we're impacting the end users or the consumers of the system, then we may not be able to do Agile to the degree that some would like to do. So it's that balancing act. But this is where, as we get to, and going back to Keith's comment again, and there's a reason why Keith's in the role he's in now, about the metrics and the analysis and looking at it, like as we sit down and we baseline a project, what is the deviation that we're seeing? How accurate were we on accurate forecasting of what costs would look like? Assessing why are we seeing these overruns, and again, trying to keep a project on the rails as opposed to watching it get off the rails. And again, a lot of our large projects that have FFP money drawing in, there are IVMV components in that, but then again, too, it's also working with our agency stakeholders for them to really take in what the IVMV vendors is showing. And it's not a criticism. This is trying to keep the project moving forward and getting to the outcomes that we all were hoping for. So, again, we're crawling now. This is why it's so important for this shift for us from being focused on majority of our staff focused on day-to-day operational components. We need the majority of our staff focused now over on all these upfront activities, so we can get to the outcomes, and then we can get to really supporting cloud, embracing cloud, and having things running, having the resiliency. Dan Kempton has been taking a look at things for me from a disaster recovery. We'll just sigh and shake our head and not talk much more about it. But, when we think about resiliency and those other opportunities that are out there, we have so much to do here in North Carolina. So go back to my opening comments. We're doing a lot of phenomenal and great things. We also got the other side of the coin. We got a lot of work to still do. And so as we try to make these changes, and we all know how difficult change is to get implemented, but we are working very hard to incorporate these changes in a methodical fashion to bring people on board so they can start seeing the benefit it brings. And so thank you for your patience and working with us on this. And, again, your comments are spot on. These are areas that we have to focus in on. And today we lack that metrics, that definitions, those data points for us to be effectively able to come back and say this, that, whatever the case may be. That's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, Jim, my comment was going to be all of those problems aren't DITs. They're IT initiatives within other agencies.
Yeah.
But DIT gets
well, and at the end of the day,
it's all prior to you.
Well, I know, but at the end of the day, Jeff, when I look at the statute, who does it fall under at the end of the day? Who's accountable? May not be necessarily responsible, but I'm definitely got the scarlet A there for accountability. And so we are going to tackle these. We are going to try to address these things. And as I said early on, we have 33 functional things, basically, I think, in statute that requires DIT to perform. I think, truthfully, we're only about on 5 to 8 of those. We're going to start focusing on some of these other areas now. And I know it's going to be a little uncomfortable for some, but that's okay. But I think we're heading in the right direction and we're making good progress. And time's not our friend. We don't have a lot of time in some of these cases, but over time, we will get to these outcomes. And I'm very positive and, as you can tell, and upbeat about that. Okay, I know we're at the top of the hour. If there's no other questions for Sarah, what I would like to do is give my awesome Vice Chair, Rocco, an opportunity for any comments, not to say last but least. He's definitely not least. Rocco, is Rocco still on?
Jim, I'm working on it.
Okay, there you are, sir.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see or hear me. I've apparently got a little bit of a network issue going on over here. But obviously a very informative session today. I've made a few notes and I'm probably going to get back to a couple of people with some additional questions, but right now I've just been trying to absorb it all.
Okay. Well, hopefully we might be able to help you out on some broadband there, Rocco.
Yeah, that'd be useful. That'd be helpful.
Okay. So our slide person, we have our next dates, or do we have any new business from members? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on quick before somebody thinks of something. Now, here's our next meeting dates. So again, hopefully you have these all on your calendars already. And I do believe our meeting invites already out there for them. Does anybody on my side of the house know if that's the case?
We haven't sent out the 2023 meetings, but we'll do that once we confirm.
We'll get those meeting dates out there on your calendar then, but you know, again, March, June, September, December timeframes that we're all accustomed to. Okay, and I think that's our last slide, right? Okay, so again, thank you. A very packed-filled 2 hours. Thank you for all your work and efforts. It is making a difference. And again, it's really helping us very much shape our legislative agenda and what we're going to be looking at for an ask and submission to the governor through the budget office, and as well as our conversations with the legislature as we move into the new legislative session. So have a great weekend, everybody. Committee members, continue to do the great work, and we'll see you in 3 months. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.